Grace and peace be yours in abundance. You are a royal priesthood. You are a holy nation. Again, the language is drawn from Exodus 19, a holy nation. Now, the contemporary notion of nation, the nation state, as we think of it in the Western world today, is really an 18th century creation. The word nation, the word translated nation here, is the word that actually produces in English our word ethnicity. You might render this, you are a holy ethnicity, although to our ears that sounds just a bit too narrowly racial for some of us. I was brought up in French. In French Canada, the French Canadians would speak of la nation du Québec, the nation. But the word nation in French means something a little different from nation in English. In English, it's a geographical political entity. But in the ancient world, although there were geographical political entities, they tended to be regional empires or the like. And then under the regional empires, there were tribes or ethnicities with various associations and self-identities. But the modern post-18th century notion of a nation-state is a relatively recent creation. In French Canada, however, something of the old flavor is there. And although French Canadians know that nationally, in the English sense, they're Canadians, yet nevertheless, nationally, in the French sense, they are French Canadians and quite proud of it. I was brought up there. They belong to la nation du Québec, do you see? And for English ears, hearing French Canadians say that they belong to the nation of Quebec just sounds like a real insult to the rest. Because somehow they're distancing themselves from Canada. But that's not quite what most French Canadians mean. They belong to the ethnicity of Francophone Canadians. But what kind of ethnicity do we belong to? What is our nation? What is our nation? And Peter says, well, you are a holy nation. What does that mean? Of course, the categories of systematic theology have long distinguished between the communicable attributes of God, that is, the attributes of God that he may share with non-God image bearers like you and me, and the non-communicable attributes of God, that is, the attributes of God that he cannot share with image bearers like me. Thus, there is no biblical passage that says, "Be omnipotent, for I am omnipotent." Because let's face it, omnipotence is an incommunicable attribute of God. On the other hand, there are many passages that enjoin us to love, and God is love, for love is a communicable attribute of God. That is, it is one that can be shared between God and his non-God image bearers. Where does holiness fit into this? It is an extraordinary category. Oh, on the one hand, it's a communicable attribute. After all, God says, "Be holy, for I am holy." That puts it in the communicable attribute side. But as you work through the uses of holy in the Bible, you discover that it has, we might say, concentric rings of meaning. And right at the very center, holy, what exactly does it mean? Some try to deal with the term in etymological categories, that is, trying to break it down into its components as some people perceive them and say, what it means is separate. God is utterly separate. But did the voices around the throne in Isaiah 6 really cry, "Separate, separate, separate is the Lord God Almighty"? It does lose something. I mean no disrespect. It is losing something. Others want it to have an overtone of morality. But are the voices around the throne really saying, "Moral, moral, moral is the Lord God Almighty"? No, at its core, in the tightest concentric circle, holy is almost an adjective for God. God is God. God is holy. And even the highest order of angels cover their faces with their wings as they join in the paeans of praise of these angelic hosts and cry, "You are God. You are God. You are God. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty." I cannot get closer to the word than that. And then as you stretch out a little farther, that which peculiarly belongs to this God is then said to be holy. It may or may not be moral. For example, the shovel that takes the ash from the altar is said to be holy, not because it's moral. A shovel is never moral. But it's reserved peculiarly for God's service and work. Peculiarly, exclusively, for nothing else. Anything else is common and therefore profane. So the shovel is said to be holy, not because the shovel is itself God, but because the shovel belongs exclusively to God. And then, of course, if the belonging refers not to a shovel, but to people, then the manner in which we belong to God is going to affect how we think and our behavior and what we say and our relationships. For we have the potential for reflecting something of the character of God in ways that shovels don't have. And suddenly there are overtones of what we call morality, living in line with what God's image bearers can reflect of the Master's holiness. And both historically in historical theology and theologically, exegetically, this holiness of God's people in passage after passage runs in one of two directions. It is sometimes, I don't know what else to call it, definitional, positional. We are set aside for God, and thus we are holy. De facto, we are holy if we have been set aside by God. And if we are set aside by God and then don't live like it, then we are besmirching the holiness of God. We are betraying what we are. We are contradicting the very essence of what God has called us to be. And then behaviorally, if we are definitionally His, and the pleasure and privilege and power of being His now works out in our lives behaviorally, then we become holy at a kind of functional level too. To tell all the truth, the word holy can actually extend in a concentric circle even farther out than that. In a handful of passages in the Old Testament, the word holy men is used to refer even to pagan priests. Not because they are holy in the narrower concentric circle senses, but at least they are operating in the domain of the sacred. They're not merely secularists. They're not merely tied to matter. But this shows you something of the range of the word in its particular locations. At its core, then, at its core, I am sorely tempted to say that holiness is an incommunicable attribute of God. Oh, I can't find words to put it quite like that. I'm not quite happy to say that, but it's very close. Only God is God. But the entailments of His holiness wash out in concentric waves, and we are to belong to Him and be His holy nation, peculiarly His, such that God in His infinite mercy dares call us holy, a holy people, a holy ethnicity, a holy nation. And thus it becomes a communicable attribute of God. Inevitably, if this really is our self-identity, and we understand it as such, inevitably, this will set up conflicts with the other kinds of corporate identities we naturally do belong to, whether as Americans or females or